Raise this. So at any point, if you're playing around with things in the book and trying to understand what he's talking about, and you don't have the right image, because that sucks if you don't have the right image and you're trying to follow along with what he's doing. I did put a link for the book files in Blackboard right in class materials toward the top. That will take you to Scott Kelby's website where you can download the files based on certain chapters. So like chapter 7 and 8 is where a lot of this stuff is coming from. So you can download the zip files and then play around with everything. Oh, it's just going to take a second to do. But if you needed something to play around with, I just earmarked a couple of things between chapters, mainly 6, 7, and 8. 1 or 2 things in chapter 6, but just a handful of things from 7 and 8 to pull out, more so 7 than anything else. So I'll give you page references with all the things that I talk about too, but I just wanted to demonstrate a couple of things and utilize the same images that he's doing. Let me do 6 also while I'm at it. So they have the zip files. I'll dump these on the server too while I'm at it. Am I still connected? Workflow. There we go. Book files. 7, 8. I'll stick them on there, then you don't necessarily have to download them either. And 6. So I'm copying them to the server now, but you can always download it straight from the website too if you wanted to. But I just stuck a book files folder on the server in our workflow class, and it has 6, 7, and 8 in it. If you wanted to play with any of those images in Lightroom, you can certainly do so. I would just make sure that you copy them off the server and maybe into your, I'm going to get a new catalog for this. Onto your hard drive or wherever, so that it's not, you don't want to reference the server for those if you import and play with them in Lightroom, because it doesn't work well. And then if you're not connected to the server, everything errors out and it's a catastrophe. So I'm just going to switch catalogs here because I don't want to do this in my catalog. Skip. Here we go. We'll use this one. Yes, it's still me.
Or is it?
I know, I love that it keeps asking that. Drives me nuts. Downloads. Chapter 6.
Not knowing who pushes the button.
I know, that's true. Walk away for a second, suddenly somebody else has gotten the power to edit.
Oh no.
Not cool. I'm just going to create a chapter 6. And import those, add. And then I will, that didn't take long at all. Then I'll do 7 real quick. I'm just going to separate them in different spots. Then we have something to play with. Duplicates. I don't think I need much from here, but just in case. Okay, now there's stuff to play with. So going through some of these chapters, I pulled a couple of things from 6 that I think are kind of cool to point out. Like, for example, a lot of people do a lot of landscape stuff, and when you photograph landscapes, what often happens, it could be based on the weather, it could be based off of other things too. But what happens is you've got some great stuff going on in the foreground, but as you go to the background, smog, fires, that kind of stuff causes this haze in the background. And sometimes it's just there in general, just because of distance. It's just there. But we have the ability to correct some of this haze so that it's very clear from foreground to background. And I know a lot of you have found this slider already, but what I want to make sure is that you know what it is and what it does. And this is called the dehaze slider, is this one. And that's what's going to take away some of that haziness in the background. So if you slide it to the right, it's looking for basically like low contrast areas of the image while maintaining the high contrast areas. and it's adding contrast into those areas, which is essentially pulling out the haze in the image. It's very easy to go over the top with this, to be over the top with that. So you do have to be careful how much you do that. And if it's affecting the whole image and you don't like, or you could make it foggy, and you don't like what it's doing, you can also find the dehaze slider underneath the adjustment brush. So if I click on the adjustment brush, I'm going to reset those here. There is the dehaze slider here. So it's really cool because now I can target just this background part right here if I want to. And just do that portion of the image. Maybe my sky needs to be done. I don't know. We'll do it this way. I need a bigger brush. There we go. I could use the graduated filter too to drag it down and do the dehaze that way if I want also. But now I can control just that part of the image separately. So dehaze is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful slider to know about and to use because it will correct a lot of things very quickly for you if you want to. Whether it's local or global adjustment, it doesn't matter. It's there in both places. So it's kind of an awesome tool. So if you've seen the dehaze slider and you're like, what the heck? What does that thing do? That's what that one does. I love it. So that's a quick and easy one. But it's one I wanted to pay attention. I wanted to draw attention to, not pay attention to. Not the word I was looking for. Okay, so one of the next things is something called dodging and burning. Has anyone dodged and burned images before? Yes. Okay, you can do that in Lightroom. I love dodging and burning. Dodging and burning is basically, think of like film, if you've done anything on film before, think of the way it used to be done with film. You would take, when you're in the darkroom, you would dodge and burn parts of your image by brightening certain areas of the negative or the print too as you're making it. And then certain areas that are brighter that you want to tone down, you darken those areas, and that's called burning. So you're burning darker areas and you're dodging and brightening other areas of the image. So we dodge and burn a lot. Photographers dodge and burn constantly. And as you progress, if you find yourself not dodging and burning, it's something you should be aware of and start practicing and doing. Because it is really a necessity. Our human eye sees things a certain way and the camera can't capture that a certain way. So where these dark areas, when we look at it, our eyes automatically adjust to the correct exposure and the camera can't. And where we have such bright areas here and shadowed areas here, our camera can't capture that in one photograph. And that's where the adjustment brush comes in handy and where it gives us the capabilities to do those dodging and burning techniques. So he talks about that, and it's actually pretty extensive that he talks about it. It goes across several pages, but it is in chapter 6, and it starts on 164. I'm just going to show you some of the basics of what it is doing and what we're trying to do, but you might also hear it called paint with light, and he mentions that in the book too. And it's an awesome, awesome thing to be able to do no matter what type of image you're working on. Here, let me do this first. I want to do a little global adjusting overall first. Get rid of some of these hot spots up here. Bring up some of the shadows. So working with the image, I don't know if I want to go much brighter than that. No. So just simple highlight shadow adjustments helps this image a lot. However, there's still some areas where it's like, well, do I want to draw more attention to it? Do I want to take the attention away from it? And that's where we use the dodging and burning technique. So for example, he's talking about a couple different areas up here in these arches right here, where it goes from being pretty dark to a little bit lighter over here. And those brighter spots, especially over here where there's a light, start to draw the attention of the viewer's eye away from the center part of the image. So when you use dodging and burning, you're helping direct the eye and change the lighting situation essentially. So what I might do is I'm looking over here and I'm seeing detail and color, but I don't see that over here. I might actually want to see some of that while still trying to fix a little bit of this too. So those are a couple things to pay attention to. A couple other things that I'm looking at as I look at this image is we have daylight coming in. We have all this beautiful window light here, but then we have artificial light back here. And that's giving us two different white balances, which can be problematic in some cases. So we can actually fix the white balance as we're dodging and burning. I'm combining two different things that he talks about in here in two different areas into one image. But those are some of the things that I notice immediately that I would probably make some adjustments to. If the detail is important here, I'm losing it down in these shadow areas because it's falling in the shadow compared to up here where it stands out a little bit more. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the adjustment brush, and to do dodging and burning, I might bring up the exposure, maybe the shadow. I'll just start here and then I'll tweak it afterwards. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to brush over this part right here. This is too much. But I'm trying to think. I don't know if I want to go. Go ahead.
Where do you get how much light you're adding to it? Is that just
These sliders over here.
Is still controls how much brush? Okay.
Yes. But the thing is, I always tell everyone just to guess at first. Just do some guessing so that you can tweak it afterwards, or at least see what you're doing, where the brush is going, and then just tweak it until it's right. So I might crank up shadows. I'm going to have to fine tune my brush a little bit here, and I'm going to turn this on and off right here so you can see. Hey guys, talk all you want, but just don't talk over. So that's just helping increase that exposure. So now it's a little bit closer to what's on that side. And I might do the same over here too. I might get a new pinpoint here, and I might brush over this. Now I wouldn't do this as intense probably, but seeing that this is brighter over here, I might want to mimic that on this side. I don't think I want to go quite as far as I did on that side, but just enough so that it's adding a little bit to it. If I can, there we go. So that little bit of a difference is kind of nice there. And again, I might do the same thing down here where I'm going to paint with the light. Now it goes back to whatever my original setting was when I first brush over it. And I think I might just do all of this area here, but then I'm just going to tone it way back because that's just too much. But now, see how it's a lot closer to what's on the other side? It's a very subtle difference that I'm working on here, but that change alone is really cool. And you can do dodging and burning. So that was just solely dodging. I haven't burned anything yet, but what I might want to do, this is shaded over here. This is brighter over here. I might want to match this side, but maybe I really just want to darken this. Or draw more attention to this light that's up here by burning this and making it a little bit darker so that the colors are a little more contrasty. So for that, maybe just to have something to burn, I would take the exposure down, and then I might have to come in here a little bit. Quick random tip, if you are in the adjustment brush and you want to get in closer to do something, normally when you're outside of the adjustment brush, you can click to zoom in and out. But when you're in the adjustment brush, you can't because then you're brushing. So the space bar actually gives you your zoom tool and your hand tool so that you can move around, so that you don't have to go in and out of the brush. So the space bar just swaps between the hand and zoom and the brush so that you don't have to go in and out. But this is a little closer than I want, but we'll work with it. So I'm just going to darken this. I'm going to do a rough thing. This isn't a very good job. I would pay way more attention to this. I don't know if I want those windows dark, but we'll try it. Pay way more attention to this. Shoom. Okay, so darkening this area. Wow, that's a really bad, oops, not what I wanted to do. That looks awful. But I can tweak this a little bit here. I can bring the exposure down. I might play with the contrast a little bit, even the shadow area. Here's the hard part. Okay, so the hardest part of this whole thing is when I'm doing this, it gives it like a gray thing to it. It almost like this gray cast to it because I'm bringing down the exposure. It's assuming I want to take out light, so it's basically adding black to it. And that can be problematic sometimes. So what I find I have to do to compensate so it doesn't turn gray and I don't lose the color as I darken the exposure is to play with the saturation just a little bit, to maybe bring up some of that saturation and maintain the color without making it gray. Dehaze sometimes comes into play too, but it's very minute when you're doing it. So do play around with the sliders a little bit because you're going to find it takes a little bit of wiggling, especially on the burning side, just because of what it does. I'll just rough up this one real quick here, so at least they're even. Maybe I'll do this side. There we go. But now what I've just done is drawn more attention to that light. That light was a little bit lost in there, and now it pops out from what's behind it. So dodging and burning is an amazing thing, and it's something that you should really think about playing around with all of your photos. Works great on the portrait side too, because if you were to take a portrait, we do this in digital editing class, we'll do this in Photoshop, but it's pretty much the identical technique where if I wanted to, let's say where she's got some shadow in her cheekbones, maybe I want to emphasize that just a little bit more. And I'm just gonna make it such a subtle adjustment. It's such a tiny, tiny adjustment that you're doing, but you might want to darken some areas, brighten some areas, and it's just doing toning to the face. Now if I add a new one and go this direction a little bit, I can brighten these areas and this one and maybe some over here, chin. I'm just kind of tweaking it real quickly. But just slight toning in the face too. Now this is a little overkill. Let's tone this one down too much. They're very, very, very subtle adjustments. But doing that, let me get out of this so we don't see the pins. Why are you not showing me before and after? It's not showing me my adjustment. Why? Why? Why did it disappear? That's weird. There they are. Okay. There it goes. Okay, I must have accidentally deleted it. But doing subtle adjustments when it comes to faces and stuff helps to tone different facial features. Obviously, I would be spending a tiny bit more time paying attention to where some of that goes in my brush, probably quite a bit lighter in order to do that. But it really is a cool tool to do that. So it can be used across the board with anything, but I think it's really powerful in architecture and landscapes to do that. You know, same thing here, we dehaze this a little bit, but this foreground is in the shade, and if you want that a little bit brighter, you're doing some of this already, but that's essentially what you're doing. You're dodging and burning parts of that image to make it stand out just a little bit more. Brighten that up just a little bit so that it stands out, and you might only want certain parts of it to stand out. You might not want the whole area. It's just little parts of it so that it gives some more detail and definition to the textures in that area. So that's everything that we're doing here. I wanted to draw attention to that one because I think that's an important one to do. Oh, there was one more piece of this one. In another area of the book, he talks about using the adjustment brush to correct white balances. And and sometimes it's just there to make cool color effects on it too. There's one thing he does, and I gotta find where it is. It's not what I'm going through, but you should definitely try it, especially if you have landscape images, because I think you would really enjoy this. Sometimes we have spotlights coming in from the sun when we photograph our images, but it would be really cool if it was more like a spotlight where it comes across the image, where you see the beam of light come across the image. And you can do that. People think you have to have another picture that you overlay and all these steps. It's seriously just a flip and adjustment brush with a different white balance. That's all it is. It's in chapter 7. Where is it? Where is it? I want to give you a page. Adding beams of light, 220. It's in chapter 7. So he talks about how you can add beams of light coming across your image, and it's simply an adjustment brush with a yellow or white balance to it. So you can use that to create effects. It's such a cool effect when you're done, but it's also, it's the same technique when you fix your white balance. So if I want to, let's say I want this to all match. I don't want this to be yellow over here. I want it to all match. I would bring it down. I'm going to change the color temperature. So I'm going to take out yellow, because that's yellow. This is blue. And then I'm just going to start painting. I want my overlay. I need to see what I'm doing. I would do a better job down here, but for the sake of time for you guys, just to get the idea, let's bring there, and it's gone. And I would do the same thing over here. I would take out the yellow over here and just match in this one too. And just match the white balances so that they're all the same. And now all the white balances are the same, minus the spots that I missed. So when you have two different lighting situations, this is awesome. It can be fun to do the same in this type of an image where maybe you don't want the background blue. She's got a yellow tone to her skin, but the background's very blue just because of the nightlight or just the, sun's just setting, whatever time of day it might be. So you might want to do the same for this background too. So you might actually want to do the opposite and warm it up so that it's a little more closely matched with what she looks like. Is it painting? Okay. I feel like it's not doing anything. There we go. Grab all these areas. Pretend I did a good job. But then we can yellow this up. All right, let's erase that out of her face because that's going to drive me nuts. There. That's a bit better. Okay, now I don't feel as bad about my sloppy job. So that will warm up your background. You can change your background colors. And sometimes it's just for effect. Maybe I want it to be pink. I want it more magenta or bright blue. I can do whatever I want. So think of white balance for effects, but it'll also correct two-toned. Okay, this is too high. Let's bring this back down. Let's bring this one back up. Now they blend together a little bit better.
Again, all those sliders will change what you have highlighted there with
Yes.
the black dot in your brush there.
Yep. Everything I have
Those
brushed.
sliders will pretty much adjust just that section when you're in the brush mode.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And then if you remember the quick key, the O will give you your overlay so you can see where you've brushed. If you have to be pretty particular about not missing certain points, it's just a mask, the overlay mask to show you. There is a,
Can't you click on something?
there is, right below the image, it says show selected mask overlay,
Oh, there, yeah.
right there.
But O does that also?
O does that, O for overlay.
Oh.
That's how I remember it. But O for overlay will get you the mask. So that's kind of a nice a nice quick thing to be able to turn on and off, like her hair. I don't want that in her hair, so I would take that out there. And I'd probably leave that on so that I could see where it was taken out. I would have put an auto mask on, in all honesty, so that I didn't get onto her hair in the first place, but there. Problem fixed. So dodging and burning is one thing, correcting the white balance is another. I kind of combined them into one thing, but I like it. Those work really nice. So all honesty, that's the two things from chapter 6. Chapter 7, there's just a couple more things that I wanted to just showcase briefly. And this entire chapter is all about, it's called special effects, saying it's making things look special. So there's some cool things, like some really cool effects. I want to show you the cross-processing effect because we never really went through what the split toning does when you're editing. There is a panel down here for split toning, and we didn't walk through that. So I want to walk through that briefly too as part of it, but I'll get there. It's in this chapter, but it's all about doing cool looking effects with your images or really manipulating parts of the image when you do your edits. So one of these things is changing individual colors. Do you know how to do that? Kind of. Can you guess what panel you would use?
What we used to do is like mask a certain area and then change the color.
Ooh, yeah. Yep, you can definitely do that. It's a little trickier in Lightroom to do it that way because you have to play with your hue. Yeah, in Lightroom you have to, no, it's okay. In Lightroom you have to use the adjustment brush. The what?
Do it more in Photoshop than
Yeah,
Lightroom,
same.
like the
Some,
select and mask or the
yes.
brush. You select an area and then
Uh-huh.
you can, and then that part won't get like changed, I guess you could say.
Exactly. Yes, the adjustment brushes and using the adjustment layers in Photoshop are probably one of the easier ways to do it. There are some ways to do it in Photoshop, or I mean in Lightroom, sorry, but know that it's going to be, it will work. In some cases it may be limiting depending on what you're trying to do, because if you only want it to apply to a certain part of the image, for example, actually let me get into chapter 7, use some of those images. So this image is pretty straightforward in that if I want to change one of these colors, there isn't, if I want to change this red, there isn't like a person standing next to it with bright red lipstick on that it would affect the red lipstick on top of it. This image is, this chunk is red, so it's very easy to do this adjustment. Where you are going to have some problems is when you want to make an adjustment and multiple parts, I don't know that he has an example in this folder, multiple parts of the image are that color. And when we do this adjustment, it's going to affect everything that's green or everything that's red. So just know that you may have some of those limitations when we do this. And the image or the adjustment brush, we have some limitations in how we can tweak that color. We're pretty much limited to the temperature and the tint sliders, like faking a white balance adjustment to change the color of, let's say, this red right here. If I wanted to maybe make it kind of purpley, but just this part of it, I would have to play with the color temperature, but it's still not quite what I want it to be because I only have saturation options and I only have the temperature and tint slider and then a little bit work with the exposure to get it the way I want. So there's a challenge there if I only want it to apply to a certain part of the image. But let's delete that and get out of here. And I'm going to go to the HSL panel. This panel is awesome. The only thing is the slider that we slide will affect all the colors in the image. So if I'm sliding the red, everything that has red attached to it will be affected. So this is where Lightroom might have some limitations, but for the example of this image in the Chapter 7 folder, if you downloaded them and are playing with them, for this example, it's very defined, blue, red, and then yellow and green. So the HSL slider has two different sections here. HSL and color, you can actually click on these individually. They're the exact same freaking thing. It's just that they display the same thing differently. So I don't know. Honestly, I was going to say I actually prefer the color, but now that I'm thinking about it, I actually use the HSL version more. Okay, I'll show you both, and you can kind of decide which one you like. HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. Hue, saturation, luminance. So when you click on HSL, you're going to see 8 different sliders. And Lightroom kind of has a one-up over Photoshop on this because Photoshop only has 6 sliders. Purple and orange is not available in Photoshop unless you're using Camera Raw. That's the only time that those 2 sliders are there. So you're actually without those 2 sliders when you do the same type of adjustment in Photoshop. But the hue is dealing with the color. So if I take the red slider, you can see one way it goes orange, the other way it goes magenta. I can adjust that red to be orange or more of a magenta color. And it will tweak just the reds. Anything that has red in it, it will tweak. Now I do notice there's a little bit of like a red reflection on the trunk of this tree, probably from the top part of this roof. It's reflecting on there, so it's changing it a little bit, but not enough that it's really bad for the image. But the hue slider, any one of these that has that color in it, that's what it's going to do. The green is either going to be more green or more yellow, or blue, I should say, or more yellow. Now, I find with landscapes, though, you're working with the yellow and the green sliders for just about everything that you do. But the hue is simply the color. These are each individual tabs to click on, too. The saturation is exactly that. Exact same sliders, the level of saturation of that particular color. And then the luminance is the exact same sliders, but it's the lightness and darkness values of each one of those colors so that you can make them brighter or darker. So you can operate them individually if you want to, just focus on all the different color things that you can do and then all the different saturations for each color and so on. But the color slider is, here's the red and the hue, saturation, and luminance for just the red. I love this. As I think about it, I actually don't use it as much as I thought I did, but I love this because if I'm tweaking something, if I'm tweaking the reds, I'm using all 3 of these sliders to tweak the reds. Very rarely can I say, oh, it's just a hue adjustment and I'm done. Once I do a hue adjustment, oh, well, now that's kind of frosty looking, so I have to darken the luminance a little bit to bring back some of the contrast in just the reds. So I'm working with all of them. And then you have each color individually. Or if you like to be super cool, you click the all button and then all of them appear instead of just one. I hate scrolling, so I just do the one. That's my personal preference. So I love the color for this because you do that, but you can do them individually too. And you want to know what's really cool? Is if you're not sure which slider to use to tweak something. So if I'm not sure if this is going to fall under magenta or red at this point, there's this little circly thing here. It's called a targeted action tool. It's called a TAT. It's got a horrible acronym. But this targeted action tool is a little tool right here. You get this little tool right here, and you click on a spot. Now here's what confuses everybody is which spot am I using? It's the little crosshair spot. So that upper left little icon there, not the one on the lower right. Because for the longest time, that's what I thought it was. It's not. It's the little crosshair. So whatever pixel is in that center point of the crosshair on the upper left is what it's going to use as its reference point. And what I love about this is you click and you drag up or down. And when you drag up or down, any color, you're actually seeing two sliders move as I do it. Any color that one part applies to, it will just tweak the slider for you for whatever you're in. So if I don't know what color it is and I want it to be a little darker here, and maybe this blue needs to be adjusted, I could tweak, and this one's only moving the blue slider and a tiny bit of the purple. So I don't have to guess what color it is anymore. I just click and drag until it's the way I want. It is a huge time saver. It's an amazing little button. I absolutely love it. So just use this targeted action tool. You can turn that on and off to just find a spot and click and tweak it. It's such a cool tool to use. I would highly, highly recommend using that. The thing you'll notice is that it's not in the color. It's only in the HSL because it's going to affect the hue of anything within that point and then the saturation of anything in that spot. So it's only available in the HSL, just so you're aware. But I love that. How easy it is to change colors of everything. It's awesome. I love that tool. I get geeky over that tool. It's one of my favorites. So changing a single color has just become a little bit easier in life. Okay, I only got a couple more, and then I want you guys to be able to go inside your groups here. I'm going to pick and choose from some of these because I had these as extra. There's a couple fun ones in here. One's just a tip. Yeah, I'm going to skip that one. Okay. Have you noticed that a lot of pictures you look at, maybe online, wherever it is, or just prints of stuff, that it's very high contrast, like overly contrast. It can be contrast to the point where it looks like too much, but almost like it's creating an HDR type of an effect. Do you guys know what HDR is?
Yeah.
High dynamic
It's like
range.
super high contrast.
Yeah, it's like multiple exposures in one image. If you've never seen, and this chapter, chapter 7, shows you how to do an HDR too. So if you don't know how to do an HDR and you want to try an HDR image or see how it's done, he goes through that here too. He also walks through panoramas. I'm not going to go through that necessarily. We do that in a few other spots, but it's in there too. It's in this chapter if you wanted to go through panoramas. But HDR images are a huge trend. It's starting to trend down just a little bit, but the high contrast image is still a huge trend among photography. Landscapes especially, more so than anything else. But basically an HDR image, it's called high dynamic range, and your camera can only capture a certain range of light and things like that. So, like the image I was dodging and burning, if I could go back here. So like this image, the camera can only either capture the light areas or the dark areas, but not both. But if I take at least 3, you can do more, but you need a minimum of 3 exposures at different settings and combine them together, it evens out the light across the board and creates an HDR image. So what you do in your camera, and you'll do this in landscape class, what you do in your camera is you take a picture at the correct exposure, and then you take one that's overexposed and one that's underexposed. And so what happens is the correct exposure captures the mid-tone ranges at the right settings. The overexposure, if I were to take this image and overexpose it, what you see is you see all the detail in the shadow areas of the image. So the purpose of the overexposed image is to capture the detail in the shadows. And then the purpose of the underexposed image is the exact opposite, is to capture all the details in those highlight areas. And then what the computer does, There we go. And then what the computer does is it uses an algorithm to find all those correct elements of the image, correctly exposed elements of the image, and then it creates something like this in the end. So it's really, really a cool piece where you have detail, highlight through shadow that your camera cannot capture. And it is really, really neat, but they're very high contrast. Sometimes they're a little surreal looking, where I think they're a little overdone. I'm not a fan of the surreal ones where it's like there's no way that that's reality. I don't, yeah, and that's the part of HDR that's kind of trending down. That's just kind of going away. Like that was so 2005. It's becoming more of let's make it look realistic, where it's still like this I would say is kind of borderline. Like that's still fairly realistic looking, a little bit more saturated than reality, but it's still capturing detail all the way from the highlight to the shadow. And that's what HDR is. We can kind of fake that look in Lightroom to an extent. And it's just a couple of steps, in all honesty. So he goes through this. He goes through this on 199. It's kind of a cool thing. I want to see if he has the same image in there because I want to use it. What image did he use? Oh, come on. Did he not put it in here? There it is. That one. So I'm going to use the high contrast settings, and I'm just going to use the exact same settings for this and maybe just tweak it after the fact. But you're really cranking 4 main sliders for the majority of this. It's so easy to do, and we're going to talk presets the next class in 2 weeks. So this is one that if you like how this looks, save it as a preset, and then it's 1 click instead of 4 or 5. So to show you what this looks like, I love this, is you take the contrast slider, and I don't like doing this often, but for this effect, you take it all the way to 100, which looks horrific at first. But we're going to kind of compensate for some of that. So I crank the contrast. This looks awful. But what I'm going to do is also try and bring back some of these highlights. So I'm going to take the highlight slider all the way down, brought back all these highlights, but now I have too many dark areas, so I'm going to take the shadow slider all the way up, which is kind of fun, and then I'm going to take something I said never to do, the clarity slider all the way to 100 too. So 4 sliders, that's it. Contrast all the way up, highlight all the way down, shadow all the way up, and clarity all the way up. So this is on 199 in your book, so don't worry if you wanted to use this effect and didn't want to write that down. It's all in the book. Now he does take it a little bit further with this, so he goes through and uses the adjustment brush and tweaks a few areas, using similar settings with it, like doing the shadows all the way up or the black slider a little bit more. So he tweaks it a little bit further, trying to bring out some details in these dark areas. Let me reset this, bring this up and shadows up. And he's bringing back some of this detail in here. Whoops, I went too far. That's okay. Pretend I didn't. I don't want to go all the way down here. There we go. Let's just pretend I'm doing a good job here. So he is simply going a little bit further with the adjustment brush in some areas. I'm not going to do all those areas. But as a whole, it is really, really cool. He said one thing you can do too is apply a little bit of a vignette all the way around it. He's just doing a post. Oh no, he's not doing a post crop vignette. That's weird. I wonder why. He's just doing a little bit of a vignette after the fact. Let me get out of the adjustment brush here. So he's doing it through lens correction. I would do it through effects, in all honesty. So that if you do try cropping it, oh, you know what? I think I know why he's doing it. Nope. Never mind. I lied. Just adding that tiny bit of a vignette just kind of hones in on the center part of the image. But check out the huge difference between the image. It's ridiculous. It almost looks like an HDR image. It's absolutely insane. So it is seriously just 4 sliders, and then depending on the image is just a little bit further tweaking if necessary. So contrast, highlight, shadow, clarity. That's it. And then just crank them all one way or the other. But it is so cool. But you can use this on portraits too. It's really fun. You have to have the right portrait for it. He did it on this one too. So if I just do contrast up, highlights down, shadows up, clarity up, it's a ridiculous high contrast. I would have to tweak this a little bit further. I wouldn't want the clarity all the way up on this particular one. I would pull that down. But that's such a cool result for an image that has the textures and the grit that other ones where typically are smooth and stuff like that. Like the grit in this one, especially the texture it brings out on his skin, is awesome. And it actually creates a built-in vignette actually that you wouldn't have to add one. But man, it's such a cool looking thing. So it works across the board. It's not specific to just that one piece. He did it on this one too. I love how it looks on this one. This one, this one, this one, this one. I love how it looks on that one. It really brings out the texture, especially in the tabletop, whatever it's sitting on. It's so cool. So that's a very, very easy one to do. There is a similar effect that he does where he's making things look wet, he calls it. So it's awesome. He has an example of like a roadway, and it's a very similar effect. It is, let's see. I think it's just the adjustment brush though. Yeah. It's the easiest thing in the world. You use the adjustment brush just on part of the image with the clarity all the way up. And that's the whole thing. It's ridiculously easy. So if I'm going to set this here, take the clarity all the way up, and then I'm just going to brush on the road. Oops. What did something still increased. No, that is just what it's doing. Okay. It's happening. So all we're doing is the clarity is adding a ridiculous amount of contrast in the edges of the image. And you could go all the way down if you wanted to. This is getting picky, but whatever. We'll play. See what it looks like. Turn off overlay. But it makes the whole ground look wet. It's cool in like fields and stuff where maybe you have a lot of stones. Pavement it works really well on, but it really does give kind of a cool texture and a wet look to it because of how it plays with the highlights and the shadows. And it is just the clarity slider all the way up. So easy to do. This one it works well on too. Sometimes I find I have to play with the highlight and shadow a little bit more when I do that, but for the most part, just the brush all the way up is all it needs, and it's pretty awesome. You could probably do that on top of the high contrast look. I've never tried that, but I bet that would be really cool. It might be over the top, but you could tone it back a little bit. But it's kind of cool. All right. I'm just going to keep plugging away until someone yells at me. I don't understand what you're talking about. I only have one more thing I want to show you, and then I swear I will stop. This last one is a split toning. It's called cross-processing, but we use the split tone panel to do it. So if you've ever done cross-processing, it's fun. But basically you're taking... trying to think of the easiest way to explain it. You're taking two different colors and you're overlaying them either on the highlight side of the image or the shadow side of the image. And I always feel like I've done this before, but that's because we did it in digital editing. So there's 1 or 2 people that have done this. But when you do a cross process, you're choosing, I want a tint. Kind of think of like an incorrect white balance. Maybe that's an easier way to explain it. Where you have the white balance of your highlights are one color and the white balance of your shadows are another. And you're taking those 2 tones and you're blending them together in the image. It's such a fun result. I think it's easiest to understand on a black and white image because you can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to change this image to black and white for the moment so you can see what it does. And then I'll bring it back to color because it looks really cool on color images. So this split toning panel, here's what we're doing. We are taking a color. We're going to choose a color, and we're going to choose the level of saturation of that color for both the highlight and the shadow. So I'm going to start with the highlights, and I'm going to say, okay, my highlights now are white to a light gray color. Let's make them yellow. We're going to make them a yellowish color. And then I'm going to increase the saturation. And you'll see this is the color right here that it's using, so you don't have to necessarily guess. Ooh, that's still green. Let's make that more yellow. There we go. So I can choose the level of saturation. So now you see I have yellow across my entire image. Oh, I'm going to increase that because it's not as obvious on the TV screen. So I have this yellow tint to my image. And I could leave it like that. It'd be fine. But I could add a second color if I wanted to the shadow. I don't know, what color should we do? Blue? Purple. Let's do purple. I dig that. So now let's do a purple color. And now what we're doing is, so now what it's going to do is overlay purple in those colors from the darker midtone area and then all the way over to the shadow side. And now the shadows are purple, but the highlights are yellow. So that's what the split toning does. It splits those 2 colors between those 2 areas. The balance slider is simply where that split happens. So what it's saying is right now, it's right in the middle of my histogram. And anything that falls darker than that middle point, that 128 out of my 256 levels, anything darker than my 128 has purple applied. Anything brighter has yellow. But we can shift where that is. If we want more yellow than purple, I could say, well, let's move that down here a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm doing this the wrong way. More yellow than purple. Go to the highlight side. I can shift it more towards the highlight side. And now it's saying more highlights than shadows. So now more of my image is yellow and only a few spots like in the darker area of her pants, her boots, her scarf, that's where it's purple. But I can do it the other way. I can do more purple and less yellow. So now it's truly only the brighter highlights, but everything that falls pretty much here and darker has purple applied to it. So that's all the balance is where that split occurs. But it's cool on black and white, but it's really cool on color. Look at that. That's fun. So this is where you can create vintage effects on your images, just cool tonal colors. I don't even know what colors he chose on here. Oh, he chose yellow and blue. Ha, we were close. We were so close to what he was doing. So you can use, this is a super, super simple way, and presets and everything like that. If you want the vintage effect, highlights are usually yellow and shadows are usually magenta. Because what happens with photo paper over time, paper yellows. So the highlights are going to show that first because there's like no ink because they're white. It's white paper. And then the shadows usually lighten up and fade. And when it starts to fade, it brings out a pinkish color. So I can choose the color from here too if I wanted to. So I can choose the magenta and then I'll just break down the saturation. This is too much. But then doing that creates a vintage look to the image. So now it just looks like an image that's on old paper that's faded. Super simple to do. I'm not going to go through the other way he does it, but he uses the tone curve to do another version of the cross-processing. You can take a peek at that if you want to. He has some really good screenshots of what he does with each color channel to get the look that he's going for. This gives you more control, in all honesty, but I'm not going to take us there quite yet because I think that's something better saved for digital editing class because it's a similar technique. But you can do it in here too. But he gives you an awesome recipe to do cross-processing through the tone curve. I love it. So how's that for being done? Haha, that's it. That's all I'm going through. I want you guys to have a portion of class to work with your groups. So I'm totally cutting it off there, but he's got all these great techniques in there. Use these pages as a reference as you work within your groups and you start editing. So next week is spring break. Don't come. But the following week, be here. You will present your project when we come into the next class. So your challenge is going to be, some of you may have started to shoot your images, some have not, that's fine. I want to make sure you have some of that time today, so if you have shot it and you want to just sit and edit, or if you plan to shoot some stuff, you can go and do that. But the one thing I want to make sure you get is putting all the images together, because I said I wasn't going to show you that last week because you wouldn't remember what I said anyway. So I want to make sure you understand how to bring your catalogs together. You can edit this stuff however you want. If it's easier for you and your group to come together and just edit off of one computer, maybe everybody import their images into the same catalog, and then one person edits first, and then the next person edits theirs second. You can do it that way. I have a feeling most of you will be doing this separately and just bringing all the finished product together as a whole. So the way to bring your catalogs together, if you do it all as one catalog, that's pretty easy to figure out. Somebody edits and then hands the catalog off to the next person. They add to it, hands it off to the next person. Do it that way. But where the confusion lies is when you combine your catalogs. And every time this happens where somebody exports their catalog incorrectly, and then when the rest of the group's trying to bring it together, half of it's missing. So I want to make sure you understand this part of it, because this is where the biggest hang up is every single time. Let's say these are my images that I'm bringing to the group. You export this set of images exactly like you do your assignments. But there's still some people in here who forget to export the images with, which is why I bring it up. Because it will not work if you do not export your catalog correctly. So if this chapter 7 collection here with all these pictures are the ones that I want to bring, remember, when you go to File and Export as Catalog, we're not exporting the images. That's what we're doing after this project. We're exporting as a catalog because we need the virtual copy, the original copy, all of that together. So in here, I'm going to export chapter 7 to the desktop. Make sure, I can't stress this enough, we're halfway through the semester. We need to make sure that we're double checking that the images are coming with it. Export a catalog with, I have selected 30 photos, so I know that it's doing all of them. Export catalog. It will do that. It will take a brief moment of time. And it's done. Now it's on my desktop somewhere in my hot mess of a computer. Chapter 7 catalog. Here it is. So Chapter 7 catalog with the pictures is often the hardest part of the whole thing. But if everyone in your group does that, you are, half the battle is already done.
You gotta make a collection first, though.
You can just select the 30 images, you can just select the images if you want to. That's fine too, if you don't have a catalog. But you just have to make sure that that export window says that it's exporting X number of images, whatever you have selected. Because if it says 1 or whatever, it's not right. You'll only have one image. So you have to make sure that whatever number you're selecting to export is the number that it says when you go to export as catalog, that says whatever you need it to. That's where the hardest part lies. So here's what the next step would be. Let me export this one so I have two different things. Two different ones to show you. 9 photos, desktop, chapter 6. Okay. I'm going to create a brand new catalog real quick. Project sample on the desktop. Skip. I'm just going to create a blank catalog so that you can see what it would look like on your end. So what you might do is 2 people export their catalog, and then you use one person's as the main to put it into. That might be one of the easier ways to do it. Or create a whole new blank catalog just for this project and then pull everybody's into it. That might be an even better way to do it, in all honesty. So here's how you add.
We'll really be together till Wednesday when we get here after today.
That's going to be the
Except
biggest
maybe
challenge.
photography class, but-
Yeah, that's going to be the challenge, is making sure that all that's combined, because once you combine them, you have to narrow it down to 50 images and then like put the 50 in a collection so that you have the images you need to present.
My plan was, edit my images, get them on a catalog
Did you
on
leave
my
something?
desktop, and then we're gonna have to combine them somehow. 'cause
Yes.
we're 3 people.
Yes, exactly.
So after desktop folder, well, it won't even be a desktop folder.
Yeah, so that's going to be the challenge, is to get all your catalogs together. So you're going to have to find a way or a time to get all that into one spot so that it can be combined. So that's the biggest challenge, because when you come into class on Wednesday, it's got to be ready to go. That's the biggest challenge.
How do we bridge the different catalogs together?
That's what I'm going to show you. But your biggest challenge is going to be finding the time to get everyone together so that it's done before Wednesday. That's going to be the hardest part of the entire thing. Because it should be just ready to copy to the server, and we present and we're good to go. So we're not going to spend class time at the beginning getting it together. So that's what you want to make sure you're doing, is that you have time before class to get it done. And if you do it like an hour before class, you're probably not going to get it done. I can guarantee you that. It has never worked for a single group to combine their catalogs and narrow it to 50 images in an hour. Something always goes wrong. So give yourself more than the hour before class to get it all combined. Maybe it is you're sending the catalog all to one person and they combine it. Maybe it's, because I have the file exchange in that Blackboard groups for you, if that works. I made sure that that was active. So if I go into the groups here, you have a file exchange option, and you can go inside there and add a file. So I could take my whole catalog. Let me take the one I just put on the desktop here. Let's say here's one of them. I could zip that catalog together, and a zip is just compressing it into one file and making it smaller to transport. I could, where's my compress? There we go. I could compress that, and what it will do is create a zip file. And once that's done, I have a zip file, and it's a smaller file size than what this folder is because it squished it all together. Not much, but a little bit. But it's all one file then, so that I can go in here and I can say, I'll just do test. Sorry to this group, I'm adding it in there. And then I can attach this zip file up here and submit. No, Lord only knows how long it's going to take to add that file up there. But I don't know how reliable Blackboard's going to be for the size files we have, but we can certainly try it.
It takes about like a good 10, 20 minutes sometimes.
Forever. Who knows how long this is going to take. But then what will happen is it'll show a list of everything that everyone's uploaded, and everyone in the group has access to those files then. So you could do it that way. In all honesty, it might be easier to use like the Google Drive through your student account and then share those files with each other. You could do it that way too. It's probably faster than Blackboard. But that's how you can, that's one way to share the files if you want. I'm going to see how long that takes. We'll let that run in the background, see what happens. But when you do get everyone together and you want to combine this stuff, to combine it, it's actually not as hard as you think. It's a pretty easy thing. It's called import from another catalog. So what you're doing is you're taking the catalog and the organization from somebody else and just adding it into yours. So it's like importing, but you're not importing the images. You're importing all their settings, all their adjustments, all their organization and their rating, and you're just adding it into your catalog. So when you do that, so remember, you're going to import, but not photos and video, import from another catalog. That's important to know. When you do that, you select the catalog. So let me do chapter 6. I'm going to select the Lightroom catalog file, hit choose, and then it's just going to take a second to look at that catalog, how many images, you know, maybe somebody exports their whole catalog by accident. You can then say, nope, I just want the collection that has the chapter 6 images, or those 20 that they're bringing. But all you have to do is verify, yep, this is what I want to import. Your file handling, I would just leave as is, add new photos to catalog without moving, or you can copy into a new spot. But I would just leave the default in all honesty and hit import. And then it adds it in. So now I have my chapter 6 collection, I have the 9 images, and then I can go do the next person's. So let's say now the other person on my team comes and they have their images. I do the same thing. Import from catalog, select their catalog, choose. This one should have 30.
It won't be on your desktop, though, will it?
They would have to put it onto you would have to put it onto one computer to combine them all together. So that's what you have to do, is get it to one computer to combine them all together. And then I hit import, and now it's just going to add these. So now I've got person A, person B, and I have all the images into one catalog. And I can start weeding down to the 50 that I need. That's how you combine them. Import from catalog. Does anyone have questions? So it's up to you guys from there how you would want to organize everything, put it together. I think what's going to be the easiest once you get all the images together is to create a collection inside your catalog that's like Final 50, or I don't care what you call it, that doesn't necessarily matter. But then once you create that Final 50 to say, okay, I want this one, this one, this one from yours, Final 50. I want this one, this one, this one, this one from yours, Final 50. And then when you end up with 50, you know you're good to go. And that's what you're going to present to the class, is just those. I think that's going to be the easiest way to do it. You can color code them if you want to, your favorite 50. You can star rate your favorite 50. But I think the challenge with that is you don't know how everyone else has rated their stuff. Someone might have used star rating, so now you can't do that with yours. So I think just creating a new collection and just dumping them all in there is by far the easiest thing to do. That way you have exactly what you need when you present. I've had some groups go through and just delete the images of the ones they didn't want. I mean, you could do that. I think that'd be fine too. It's one way of doing it.
How do you delete an image right on the screen here? You can get it off your hard drive and on Lightroom.
When you are in, to get it out of Lightroom and the hard drive, you'd want to be in that all photographs part of your catalog. And then when I delete it out of there, like if I get rid of this one, when you hit the delete key or you right click and you can say, where is it? Remove photo. It will ask you if you want to remove it just from Lightroom or delete from the disk. So if you want it to go away completely from your hard drive, you're just trashing it and getting rid of it forever, you would hit delete from disk. Otherwise, remove will just take it out of Lightroom. If you do it from a collection, like if I delete this image from here, it's still going to be in Lightroom because when it's inside of a collection, it's just an organization feature. But when you do it, when I do it from a catalog, it's not going to ask me that question. It just says remove from collection. You have to do it from the catalog as a whole to get rid of it completely. So you could do it that way. That's up to you. It's pretty wide open to how you want to do it. I want you guys to come up with the workflow and process that works best for you guys. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what you have to do for that. That's up to you guys to decide. And when we come into class that day, I'll show you how to do a real quick slideshow so you can just play it for us that way. Super simple. Because I took the slideshow thing out of this class. Because it's just seriously the click of a button, so it's really easy. So I took that project out since I bumped everything back a week for you guys. So I'll show you how to do that when we present it, because it's cool and easy to use. Okay. Do you have any questions with your project or where you're at or any of that stuff? Feeling okay about what you've chosen? Everyone has a topic? Maybe I should ask that first. Yeah. Okay. I was a little worried about that. Okay. Fantastic. So I'm going to give you guys the remainder of class to do whatever it is you need to do within your groups, get questions answered, all that good stuff.